Hi folks, today we are talking about just an introduction to agriculture and the agricultural revolution. So you should take a second to set up your notes about these key concepts and questions. So we're going to talk about what is agriculture first. Agriculture is the purposeful planting of crops or raising of livestock for human society. And there are three essential goals of agriculture: providing feed for animals, food for humans, and fiber. So think about fiber coming from the fur or hair of that livestock. The significance of agriculture is that it led to the development of sedentary societies, which led to the development of civilization, high population growth, and the creation of cities. So agriculture has really allowed us to get to the modern age. Agriculture is important because its purpose is to create consumable calories. So 1 acre of farmland can feed 10 to 100 times more than an acre can sustain a hunter or gatherer society. And it's important to remember that agriculture does not always equal food production. So here I've got some examples of how agriculture such as cotton or the growing of corn for ethanol gas doesn't necessarily result in food production, but it does result in something that is important for human society. Other examples are tobacco, and think about all of the things that corn is included in, like toothpaste, spark plugs, and diapers. And also remember that not all food is from agriculture. So we get food from other sources. Fishing is considered aquaculture. And there are some natural ingredients in our processed foods, such as castoreum, which is oftentimes labeled as natural flavor. And this is in a lot of our foods, and it is a substance that is extracted from beaver glands. So it's considered a natural material. Oftentimes it's used to create a berry type of flavor. So, pre-agricultural societies are called foraging or hunter and gatherer societies. This is when people are really tied to the seasons of plants and the movement of animals. They're nomadic, which means that they move around and they use simple tools to hunt these animals or to gather vegetation like roots or berries. This is considered pre-agricultural and pre-sedentary. These people typically travel in small groups of about 40 to 60, and oftentimes they're referred to as tribes, and they do move quite frequently. There is a specific division of labor tied to gender in these societies. Men were responsible for hunting and fishing, whereas women were responsible for collecting berries, nuts, and roots. So the men were the hunters and the females were the gatherers. Today, it's estimated that about 250,000 people, and that's 0.005% of the world, still survive through hunting and gathering. So they live in really isolated locations like the Arctic. You can see here the Americas, Central Africa, and some parts of Asia. And we can't forget the Aborigine people of Australia as well. Okay, so the first agricultural revolution. It's oftentimes referred to as the Neolithic Revolution, and the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture took place very slowly. Think about it, the first humans are recorded about 2.5 million years ago, but agriculture began about 10,000 years ago. And this occurred as a result of the domestication of two things: animals and plants. So this led to the beginnings of subsistence agriculture, and that led to permanent or sedentary settlement of humans. And remember that sedentary means a farming system where a farmer remains settled in one place. So what triggered the agricultural revolution? First of all, we see population increases about 10,000 years ago, and so people are prompted to search for more reliable sources of food. And the second thing that prompted the agricultural revolution was after the Ice Age, we saw the retreat of a lot of big game that societies were relying on, such as mastodons. Human hunters had to turn to smaller game like deer and wild boar, and so they weren't being as sustained as possible. So remember from your reading that Carl Sauer argued that agriculture started in the land of plenty. And it's the idea that people have to be able to spend time experimenting with raising plants and breeding animals. So they had to live in a fairly prosperous place for this to start. And so this prosperous place that Carl Sauer mentions is Mesopotamia, which is also known as the Fertile Crescent. And so once we have the domestication of plants and animals, it's important to break them down. Plants are broken down into two different types, root crops and seed crops. And remember that root crops are crops that are cultivated by taking the roots of plants and burying them in the ground. The hearth of these root crops was in South and Southeast Asia, and some examples of it are what you would know of as like sweet potatoes and taro root. But seed crop is the other type, and this is the reproduction of plants through annual planting of seeds, and it results successfully from fertilization. So this is a more complex system due to having to select seeds, sowing the soil, watering those seeds, and then harvesting them. So the first agricultural revolution has multiple hearths for these seed crops. And so this is a more complicated map that is shown to you in your textbook. And remember, there are 8 hearths that you have to know. Mesoamerica, South America, what we consider the Aegean region, which is right here, West Africa, and the East African Nile River Valley. Remember Mesopotamia, or the Fertile Crescent. This is also referred to as Southwest Asia. The Ganges River in India, as well as the Indus River in India, and the Weihang River Valley in China. And so new evidence has actually suggested that one of the oldest hearths is in China. But during this Neolithic revolution, these agricultural techniques of production spread mostly from Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, the Middle East, and moved southward down the Nile. So these were the first 2 places that were directly affected by the agricultural revolution. Here's another map that shows you a more simple version of these hearths, but it also links the important crops that were found there. And so some really important things that you should know is that in the Mesoamerica and Aegean region of South America, we have hearths in squash, peppers, cassava, cotton, maize, and potatoes. So maize and potatoes are big ones here. In Africa, we see the yam, sorghum, and then varieties of African rice. In Southwest Asia, this is referred to as the bread basket because you have all of these grains that were successful and have hearths in Southwest Asia, such as barley, lentils, wheat, and there's a few different kinds, oats, and rye. Also, it's important to see that rice, soybeans are hearthed in East Asia, in China. And then lastly, in Southeast Asia, we see the mango, the taro root, and coconut. Okay, so let's look at the domestication of animals. This also has multiple hearths and various dates. However, dogs are the earliest known domesticated animal. They've been recorded as domesticated up to 12,000 years ago in multiple regions of the world. Southwest Asia is believed to be a major hearth of animal domestication, just like it's a major hearth of seed crops. These societies in which animals were domesticated had to be sedentary because they had to be tied to the land to provide for these domesticated animals. So Southwest Asia and Northeast Africa, you can see here, are known for animals like the sheep, goat, pig, dog, and cattle. Southeast Asia are known for pigs, water buffalo, and you can see here they are labeled for chicken as well. South Asia, known primarily for cattle. In Central Asia is really important to know, are known for the domestication of horses. This led directly to the success of the Mongolian Empire. Lastly, we travel over here to Mesoamerica, and you can see domestication of the turkey and the llama and alpaca. So subsistence farming today. You can see here on this map where subsistence farming can be found, and this is primarily in developing countries in the Amazon Basin, Central Africa, and Southeast Asia. And subsistence agriculture, remember, the function is to provide food for direct consumption of the farmer and his family. So there's some major differences between subsistence and commercial agriculture. So subsistence agriculture is when people are using handmade tools and doing manual labor on the farm. Whereas commercial agriculture, the purpose is to generate products for sale, not for the consumption of the farmer and his or her family. And so the two major differences are the percentage of farmers engaged in these types of agriculture and the use of machinery. So in your book you read about Guatemala and how 50% of Guatemala's labor is employed in agriculture, whereas Canada only has 2% of their labor employed in agriculture. This doesn't mean that Guatemala produces more crops because there's more people working. It's actually an indication of the lack of mechanization and machinery used in their fields. So with less machinery, you need more people to do the work. Canadians are using heavy machinery like planes, combines, tractors. They're using trains to transport their crops and semi-trucks. So they can produce a lot more crops, but they don't need as many people to work those machines. On average, developing countries have about 44% of their labor engaged in agriculture, whereas developed countries only have 5%, and the US only has 2%. Another big difference between the two is the size of a farm. So subsistence farms, the land is typically held communally by a village. They share the land, or people own very small plots individually. Whereas commercial agriculture, there are larger land sizes controlled by fewer farmers. So there are some types of subsistence agriculture. The first one is shifting cultivation. This is extensive, which means that it takes up a lot of land, and it's practiced in tropical rainforests and climates. So we see really high temperatures and abundant rainfall. There's about 5% of the population of the world that uses this form of agriculture. Primarily found in South America, Central and West Africa, and Southeast Asia. And it has two distinctive features. The first is slash and burn agriculture. This is when trees are cut down and vegetation is burned off to add to the soil's fertility. This layer of ash acts as a fertilizer. And the second distinctive feature is that individual plots rapidly lose their fertility after the first few years, so they can only be used for 3 years or less. Oftentimes they have to be abandoned from anywhere from 6 to 20 years to regain their fertility.